This is Mae Brussell. This is tape number 340, side 1, 1978, in Carmel, California. There are several things I want to go into regarding the tape cassettes that you're receiving. In case you have any questions, I'll have it on the tape for all of you to receive at the same time and save some unnecessary correspondence. If you have any question about the tapes, if they arrive blank or don't arrive at all, many of you know, and some of you don't, send them just back to the tape center, to Betty Phillips. She's very nice about it. Correspond with her about your tapes if they're clear, unclear. Most of them have been pretty good, and the kinks have gotten out of the sending of them now, but sometimes they don't arrive or the mails are late. Correspond with Betty, because as soon as these tapes are done, they're given to her and they're out of my hands from that point. The checks and subscriptions or new members, joining World Watchers, people that want new tapes, write to me. I send a list of the shows, and if you take them regularly and want a typed list, it isn't indexed, you can have a list of the shows and subjects. Make your own tapes. A lot of people are saying now, not a lot, but a few have written that the tapes don't have the subject matter on the outside, they have the date and the number. There are too many tapes going out now to type them up. We don't have any staff to type up the subject matters, but you do get the printed sheet each week that comes with the tape, and I enclose that with the cassette, and that has a list of subjects on each side. So all you have to do is, on the blank space of the tape, just put a memo of the topics that you want to remember that are in there. You can write small and get a lot of information on that, and just label your own tapes. It has the date and the number, and just put your own subject up there, condensed from this printed sheet, and keep a record for yourself. If you don't want to refer to the printed sheet, which is more than a name label, just give your own name up there, and whatever subject it is, put it in there and take care of it that way. The checks are sent to me, the orders are sent to me, and I cross-reference on a chart, and I do make some errors. Sometimes I forget to send out ones that are paid and catch it, or Betty catches it for me, and she keeps a record at the other end. So there are two people keeping a record, and it does get a little complicated. You're working with a lot of information coming in and going out. So be patient if there's any mistake, but don't wait. Some people wait and say, going back 2 or 3 months, I didn't get this particular broadcast. Don't wait that long, because there's no way of us checking up. And also, it isn't fair to yourselves. Some people paid twice and said, well, I just as soon pay and get another copy. That isn't fair to you or us, because the purpose is for you to get the information. The tapes go out to you so that you have this information. I want you to have it. Sometimes I wonder why I'm even doing these, because it'd be much easier to just sit down and write books and reach more people, and it does take a certain amount of time and organizing and keeping the material out. And I don't know whether to stop the tape cassettes and just write articles and books, or continue on a weekly basis. I'll decide that in the fall, or late in the fall, whether I'll continue. The only advantage, I think, of continuing the tapes and mailing them out and trying to increase the amount of people taking them is that we are being deprived of our history, and George Orwell has some things to say about that in 1984. And as George Santayana says, those people that don't study our history, I forget the direct quotation, how it goes, are subject or liable to make the same mistakes. And the history books are being rewritten inaccurately, or being written inaccurately, and the news isn't covering the stories the way they should. And the one value of these tapes, those people that take them, is that you can copy them. You can make as many copies as you want. There's no copyright. Send them to as many people as you want. And I truly believe that this is going to be the one truthful account of our era that has been going out for the last 7 years. I believe that I've given the best news analysis that I can find from any single source, making the interlocking connections of these various facets of government that do conspire against us. And those people that have these cassettes will be able to teach people in the future, even if by word of mouth, the real story of our times. I see myself as a running historian now, with a weekly opportunity, as I say, started 7 years ago, now in the 8th year, to tell the facts as they are with sources of places to find the facts. And this is a valuable thing which has not been picked up by other researchers. There's newsletters going out and very valuable information that I get from other people all around the country and out of the country. But nobody seems to be correlating it and assembling it in a manner in a pattern that makes sense. And I hope I'm making sense to you. And I think the only value, as I say, in continuing and doing this format is to say that it is reaching people who can hold on to these things and spread them and maybe duplicate them or print them up someday. And for that reason, I will continue, I think, to spread this information as far as I can. Now, there is one problem that I have to discuss with you as researchers, which you have to consider, and that is the use of my material should be appreciated in the sense that I don't stick to certain magazines or books that are called liberal, or just the John Birch Society that's the right, or the very extreme ends, the Nazi Party, or the Minutemen, their publications, or the left, the socialist papers and communist literature, things coming out of Moscow. I'm trying to assemble everything that is printed specifically on these particular murders and assassinations, and as much as I can on what I can call these conspiracies. And several people have written to me, I've mentioned it before, objecting to my giving credit to the National Labor Caucus. They call them goon squads. They say they're to the far right. They work with people like Warder LaBelle and Liberty Lobby. And the Labor Caucus has been bandied around as being thugs, brainwashed, dangerous. Now, I just reiterate over and over again, if they were the only people that published the list of the Trilateralists before the election, now people are complaining about it, writing articles. It's very chic to talk about the Trilateral, but the important thing is to get these facts out before people are elected, before Jimmy Carter had in Brzezinski and Cyrus Vance and the crew that he's got. We should have disseminated their information, if the information was accurate, and about the Bilderbergers and so forth, before we were on the brink of World War III. We are on the brink of World War III. I can see within 10 years from today that the entire world can be Nazi. I see it, I believe it sincerely, just as I could predict the events of 1978 as early as 1968. I can see 10 years from now the swastikas in every single country, and I can see us in a war very easily. Jimmy Carter said 4 times last week at the Bonn conference, at the airport, at the Berlin Wall, at the meetings, that if Germany is touched, we will go to war. If Germany is touched by the Soviet Union, and he also said that East and West Germany would be one country, that we would go forward and start combining East and West Germany as one country, and if anybody stopped us, we would be in World War III. And that is being written up by the columnists. This story of Mrs. Kerensky traveling around, I don't want to do a whole tape on that today. I think that it's an overplayed media hype started by the White Russian czars and Mr. Brzezinski and Solzhenitsyn sitting up in his estate in Vermont, taking this woman and parading her and using the excuse that a man wanted to go to Israel. As soon as he's out of Russia, I'll bet you, all of my research, he never stays in Israel. I'll bet you he ends up in a $500,000 state in the United States, funded by the Trilateralists and the Rockefellers and the CIA, just as Solzhenitsyn did, or Svetlana Stalin. This is a Cold War strategy to talk about human rights in Russia at the time that Bolivia went fascist this week, that heads of states are being killed in various countries, just like popcorn popping, and this is a smokescreen that people are falling behind. I don't think that you should fall for these Cold War strategies, and I don't think you should attack the sources. That doesn't mean that I don't find faults with the National Labor Caucus. There's things in Solidarity I don't like, and I have to keep saying this on the telephone to people and in letters they write, and maybe every tape if I have to say it. It doesn't matter the source of the information if the information is correct. Now, several people, at least 8 people, have written to me about a book, the UFO secret weapons in which the allegations are made that Adolf Hitler is alive, that we did a tape about. And I've gotten, as I say, these correspondences that Samizdat Publisher is a Nazi publication in Canada, that they're pro-Nazi, and that the source of information comes from Nazis. And again, I want to make this perfectly clear to you, my tape family, these people out in the world out there. It doesn't matter if a Nazi publication tells the Nazi world that Adolf Hitler is alive. If you read Mein Kampf, you knew everything that Adolf Hitler was going to do in Germany. He wrote it in prison, and he told you. Now, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, the London Times didn't tell you as much about Adolf Hitler as Hitler told you himself. A Nazi is a source of information. It doesn't matter if a Nazi says it. The question is, why would they say Hitler's alive? Because they're communicating with each other. That's why they're saying it. I was at a party this last Sunday. Young gentleman was there, and he was saying goodbye to his mother. I hadn't seen him for several years. And he said he was going up to Tahoe and do some skiing, and he was going up to Canada. And then he was going down to South America, and he said, I'll be back, and then I'll be back. I'm going back to South America again. And I asked him, where do you go in South America? And he said, Buenos Aires. And I said, oh, that's an interesting place. And he said, yes, it's beautiful. The people on the streets. It's a place where women aren't molested. They're singing and dancing. And I said, well, what about the goon squads there? I read that about 1,700 people disappeared last year and were killed by the police, and another 1,000 the year before, that there are these death squads and no trials, and the radicals, left, liberal, socialist, labor people are all being kidnapped and murdered. And he said, yes, that's true. But he said, you read more about that in the United States than we read in the papers down there, which is also true. And I said, what about Adolf Hitler? Do they talk about Hitler? He says, yes, they talk about Hitler in Argentina. He's alive. And I said, I know he's alive. I'm working on the story right now and trying to figure out a way to get it into some national attention, national investigation. And he confirmed it, and he talked about the birthday party in Brazil, April 20th, 1978. That was Hitler's birthday, where Mr. Wagner was picked up, a man who ran the concentration camps in Treblinka. He not only was arrested there and wanted in 6 countries, but you haven't seen his name in a newspaper since he was arrested. I haven't seen a column about it except the day that he was arrested. You can collect those stories for me if you want, but I haven't seen them. Now, this person who went down there doesn't meet with the Jewish community. He's not meeting with the terrorist victims. He is obviously some kind of a bag man. He's a young person with no noticeable income who makes 2 trips to Buenos Aires and up to Canada. So the circle that he travels in knows what's going on. And you can't just go out with people from the left. There's a representative here from the Civil Liberties Union, and when I call and talk about Adolf Hitler, he says, for sure he's dead, you're wrong, you're wrong. The left knows Hitler's buried. The right says he's alive. Does that make the right wrong or the left right? The left correct? No. Your sources of information have to be continuously studied. I did one dialogue conspiracy on the entire issue of the Police Gazette and Adolf Hitler. Then I saw this UFO book, and it made sense. And then I read that book, Were We Controlled, again, about the Nazis and the Argentine connections. And then, again, Who Killed Hitler, that I talked about last week on the tape, and you, Trevor Roper. But the sources have to come from a lot of different people, and a lot of people will write and telephone me, and you have a right to question my sources of information. And I think new listeners and people that just begin taking these tapes don't know the breadth of the work that I have and the amount of references I have before I come to a certain conclusion, but they'll learn in time. And they certainly can learn by ordering all the past tapes if they just start subscribing to the present and go forward. You can get the past tapes, and you can read the articles I wrote in The Realist on these subjects. But I do want to say that you cannot worry about the source. Read it, and read what these people have to offer. If they make a misstatement, correct it. if my facts are wrong, correct me on the facts. That's fine. I appreciate that because I certainly don't want to be wrong. I don't want you to be afraid of me. And I will take corrections, and I appreciate them. I would like to learn if my sources are wrong, and if the things that I've quoted about the Labor Party are wrong quotations, tell me that, and I will change and look it up. The fact that they say Jerry Ford is a good man as against Carter is a bunch of bullshit. I know Jerry Ford worked on the Warren Commission, worked with Navy intelligence, the CIA. I don't trust him. I can't stand him. I think he should be prosecuted for covering up the Watergate and for pardoning Richard Nixon and a lot of other sins. But on the other hand, if there are articles about the British Institute of Mind Control in England that Dr. Peter Byrne came from, and then Peter Byrne is pushing the paraquat poisoning in Mexico, or the PCP, the angel dust, and refused to do anything about that, investigate Dr. Peter Byrne. I'm glad he got fired from the White House this week. He was prescribing a Quaalude under another person's name, but I know the Quaaludes were responsible for the death of Freddie Prinze. I know that doctors give these poisonous drugs that make people go insane and homicidal. And we also know that people like Beverly Kay, the secretary in the White House that was typing up those 18-minute tapes and the White House tapes, died, got poisoned, and had a hemorrhage and died right in the White House at the height of Watergate. So the question is, which White House doctors are prescribing? What does Peter Byrne do with the Quaaludes? His name isn't on the prescriptions. I think he got fired for a small thing, but it could have been a big thing. And of course, he came from Haight-Ashbury, where the hippies began to be poisoned and murdered and insane, went insane then. If he is doing dangerous drugs to wipe out a whole counterculture right now with the PCP and the paraquat and defending it against absolutely indefensible position, was he down at Haight-Ashbury also poisoning the kids? And what was the Quaalude for? What was this woman getting it in Washington, D.C. for? And how do we know that somebody in the administration couldn't possibly be driven insane or crazy and then taken off to a psychiatrist for further treatment? I'm glad Dr. Peter Byrne is out of there. But again, the Labor Party was one of the first people, or the only person, pushing the counterintelligence, deep cover role of Peter Byrne, the White House shrink, who they thought had control of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter's heads, and here he is prescribing Quaaludes in Washington, D.C. You have to read these papers. You may not like everything they say, but you have to have some guideline to screen it out. I've gone at length, almost half the tape on this, because sources of information are important. Now, there's a book in San Francisco put out by a cadre. They call themselves the Communist Cadre, and it's about the assassination of John Kennedy. Half the book is good information, and half of it is disinformation. At one point in the book, they said that John Kennedy ordered the murder of DM. And I offered to work with these authors or set them straight because they want Sirhan released. They say he's a victim of mind control and he's innocent. And they have a lot of good points, and some of their points are fuzzy. And I say, okay, let me help you with the fuzzy areas and clear them up. Why did you write that John Kennedy ordered the murder of DM? You know that at the time of Watergate, E. Howard Hunt had State Department papers that were highly classified. He was paid $100 a day, hired by the White House. Who's Who in America in 1972-73 has E. Howard Hunt's occupation at the White House. He had razor blade and ink, and he was forging documents to say that John Kennedy killed DM, ordered the murder of DM. And why would the E. Howard Hunt, 19 years in the CIA in counterintelligence, go to the bother of forging documents that at the time of the arrest if actually Kennedy had ordered the murder of DM? What proof did they have? And I asked the author, one of the authors of this book, what is your proof that Kennedy killed DM? And he said, well, I don't have any proof of that, but we want to paint Kennedy as black as we can so nobody has an illusion that Kennedy is good. So that the left can smear history and change history around as much as the right. And you have to steer clear of these books. That's why it's important to get as many books and read them and become a judge of yourself because you can't trust anybody. You can't even trust Mae Brussell, but I'll give you the sources. And I think because of the 15 years' work of knowing every author that's written on the subject, you can get a good range of references by which to check your information if you write to me for further bibliographies or read what I tell you to read. Capers Thompson, who was visiting with me from Florida last week, sent me a book when he got home. He just got back there, called The Death of Adolf Hitler, written by Lev Bezmemensky. This book is put out by Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. I've given you the title and the date. And of course, they allege that Adolf Hitler did, in fact, die in the bunker. And because I've been pushing the part pretty hard that Hitler's still alive, I want to read every book on the subject and see where the information is coming from that Hitler died and compare the sources. This man has the opinion that Hitler's dead, and I want to read it. I want to stand corrected if I was wrong. And of course, as soon as I got into the book and read the introduction, it seems that the information, again, about the death of Adolf Hitler came from Goebbels in May the 2nd or so. Evidently, he didn't die at the same time Hitler did, but it begins in the introduction on page 8 by saying, by page 8, it said that Professor Trevor Roper, who carried the thorough investigation of Hitler's death, has the view that the ashes were collected into a box and handed to Arthur Axman, leader of the Hitler Youth. There's some slight evidence for this, as Trevor Roper points out, and it would be a logical act to pass it to the next generation. So the book goes into the death of Hitler, and I'm almost through with the book, and of course I don't think it proves the point at all that Hitler was dead, but I'm going to read every book and every section of every book and show the arguments they give as against the people that maintain he's alive, and all that they can do is allege or guess. As Roper says, it would be logical to hand the ashes to the youth, but there is no youth and no ashes to prove where, in fact, they would exist. Now, when we get to sources of information, I want to share with you a letter I received from George Seldes yesterday. George Seldes is a newspaper man, a muckraker of the first sort, praised by various fine researchers that I know, such as David Miller and Marge Gibson and various people. They have turned me on to him. Art Cherry, and a lot of people have said, read George Seldes' books. I'm a late reader, I guess, because I didn't have any. And I will give you the name of some of these books he wrote from 1929 to 1947. I'll put them in the printed sheet with the tapes. Books such as You Can't Print That, Can These Things Happen, World Panorama, Iron, Blood, and Profit, The Witch Hunt, The Facts Are, Facts and Fascism, 1,000 Americans, and so forth. George Seldes seems to be a folk hero of sorts, a harder hitter than I.F. Stone, and some people believe that I.F. Stone was allowed to surface to push the kind of journalism that George Seldes had into the background. Now, I wrote to Seldes. I gave him an automatic membership, of course, to World Watchers International. I praised him for his work. I apologized for not knowing him before. And he wrote me a letter which is a shocker, and I want to read it to you on this tape. He said, Dear Mrs. Brussell, I was happy to get your letter. He thought I was a member of the younger generation because I hadn't heard of him. I guess I'm just more stupid than some because I did not know him until several years ago. He said there was a time I was on the bestseller list just so long as I exposed the corruption of foreign fascism or the foreign press and censorship and all that. When I wrote Freedom of the Press and Lords of the Press, my big publishers turned them down, and I had to find small but courageous publishers. Today, I can find almost no one who will touch my manuscripts. I have been red-baited, libeled, slandered by the press and radio, and he says, by radio commentators, syndicated columnists, and every crooked journalist in the country. You will have difficulty finding my books. I've been trying to get them at secondhand bookshops, But he says the price has gone up to $2 or $3. They used to be 50 cents or a quarter. Very few are available. I myself have only 2 copies of 3 of my 19 books. He said, I like Paul Krasner's article about you in The Realist, but it was called The Queen of Conspiracy, and that phrase put me off. In 68 years of newspaper work, I have found few conspiracies, and in every instance where a conspiracy could be charged to big mass media, say the powerful newspapers who live on money from advertisers, I always found there were small publications, usually weeklies like The Nation or New Republic, which somehow got the facts and published them. So that no conspiracy of silence really existed. This is from George Seldes. First he tells me he can't get anything published. Then he says there's no conspiracy. The press may have suppressed, but somehow did publish the news. In 1940, there was so much crookedness and suppression of facts that I started a weekly newsletter called In Fact. It was the first publication in America, if not the world, devoted entirely to press criticism. Where did I get the suppressed facts? From what you call facts about conspiracies from newspaper men. In 10 years, no less than 200 men supplied me with all I could print. Among them were Drew Pearson and George Polk of CBS, the man who was killed in Greece. At that time, the newspaper said he was killed by the Reds. I published the fact that he had written for me. I never said the name of my informants who are now alive. And he said he feared the fascists would get him. And now, 1978, it is revealed that it was the right and not the left that killed Polk. I believe in research, in getting the documentary evidence, full disclosures. I do not believe that there are powerful forces now, as always, working for either power or money, always against what may be called the general welfare. There are bankers who backed Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler. There are army colonels and generals who usually back every fascist takeover. I've never seen the list of backers in the newspaper, but they have been published in true free publications, such as, in fact, my newsletter. But there is no conspiracy. Silence, yes. Suppression of news by powerful media, yes. Conspiracy, no. Then, this is the last paragraph. Here's something for you. Can you or people who help you find out what became of the list of 12 million Nazis abroad who favored and aided Adolf Hitler? On December 24th, 1945, in fact, there was published a report that the U.S. Army obtained this list. There was a Hearst man at the White House, I can't reveal his name, who sent me the facts. The London Express published the report that when the U.S. went into Europe, they captured a card index of all the Nazis abroad, and they kept it. At that Nuremberg trial, it was testified that the U.S. had 900 Nazi documents, but nothing on this subject has yet been published. It would be a world sensation. Cordially yours, George Seldes. Now here's a man in 1978, writing in July 22nd, 1978, who has ears and eyes. He's reasoning, he's thinking, he's published books. He is an accepted journalist who has exposed the system, how is it possible after Watergate, after reading the books on Reinhard Gehlen and the plans to over Number 341, Side 2, July 28th, Carmel, California, 1978, of course. The UPI carried a story just this week, a couple of days ago, in their column. It went all over the United States, all over the world, I guess. The title of it was, "The CIA Tried to Have Oswald Exhumed." It's byline Washington. It said, newly released files show that the CIA, suspicious that the Soviet Union may have brainwashed Lee Harvey Oswald, sought unsuccessfully to exhume his corpse to see if his reported 1959 suicide attempt was a Russian cover-up. The CIA considered Oswald's alleged suicide attempt 4 years before he killed John Kennedy, again, of course, they always say he killed John Kennedy, one of the crucial points in Oswald's experiences in the Soviet Union, according to an internal Warren Commission memo made public yesterday. That was just the beginning of the week in July 1978. This through the Freedom of Information Act. The CIA wanted to dig up Oswald's corpse and examine a scar on his left wrist where he supposedly deeply slashed himself October 21st, 1959, after being denied Soviet citizenship. The CIA felt if the suicide incident is a fabrication, the time supposedly spent by Oswald in recovering in a Moscow hospital could have been spent by him in Russian secret police custody, being coached and brainwashed for his appearance at the American embassy 3 days later, where he renounced his U.S. citizenship. The body was never dug up, said the commission, and the commission, the CIA said, made no final judgment as to whether Oswald's suicide attempt was authentic. Followers of conspiracy theories contend that one strong possibility is that Oswald was a Soviet agent when he again shot Kennedy. Twice in the article, he didn't allegedly kill Kennedy. The committee's looking into this. It's when he shot Kennedy. A copy of the memo from one commission assistant counsel, W. David Slauson, to another Arlene Specter, was made available to the UPI by Michael Levy, a freelance researcher who obtained thousands of assassination documents through a request of the Freedom of Information Act. Now let's analyze this article. This is terribly important because of the disinformation it has and because of what I warned the select committee back there and sent to various researchers what I called a position paper dated September 17, 1976, with a list of 11 requirements for the $5 to $6 million project they were going to do in Washington in order to find out who killed John Kennedy. Now, in the first place, I warned about what they call newly released files from the CIA, because as I said on the other side, remember how E. Howard Hunt was forging documents that could be released later after Richard Nixon had completed his election in 1972 to show how Kennedy not only was sleeping with all these various women like Mrs. Exner and so forth, but that he actually had ordered the murder of a man 3 weeks before he was killed. And in this position paper, I listed the fact there were these 11 points that maybe I'll go over with you again next week. But one of them was, beware of material that comes in late that can be planted, because newly researched documents could be put in there falsely. On page 9 of the position paper, which I should copy and make available for you, is 13 pages, so that would be $1.30 from plus postage. If you don't have this, and you really should have it, many of you, most of you people who have the tapes have now ordered the Ajax file, the Gemstone papers, and Lillian Castellano's testimony. You should have this. As I say, it's 10 cents a page for me to have it copied, so there's 13 pages here. But point number 7 I made on page 9 was, false documents and planted evidence, accessories after the fact, must be screened out in some way. Don't fall for the new evidence from the FBI and the CIA before they examine any old evidence. The Warren Commission was not deprived of information necessary to find out who killed President Kennedy. The Justice Department was not deprived of evidence to find the persons who killed Reverend Martin Luther King or Robert Kennedy. E. Howard Hunt, CIA agent, along with other persons, would be called to testify before your committee. They were caught He was caught as a professional forger inside the White House. The president, the Pentagon, and the CIA, along with the news media, were part of a combine to deceive the American public. Top State Department papers, secret, trusted to the military, had been delivered to Mr. Hunt along with scissors, razor, typewriter in order to blame John Kennedy for the murder of DM. Now, if the House Select Committee investigating the assassinations wants to find out who is doing the continuous murders, they should assume that many so-called new documents can be forgeries. If FBI agent James Hosty threw Lee Harvey Oswald's alleged letter down the toilet after the assassination of John Kennedy, he should be put in prison both for destruction of evidence and for perjury. While it would be comforting to Gerald Ford to believe that he did the best job he could on the Warren Commission, the new evidence that has appeared isn't all fact, and Gerald Ford knows that, as well as every member of the Warren Commission, members and staff. They were selected to cover the crime of the century. Nobody should be spared. Beware of planted documents by the FBI and the CIA. Now, this article released through, it says the memo was signed by W. David Slauson. David Slauson is the same CIA lawyer on the Warren Commission who 2 weeks before the Warren Report was published sent a letter that they should go ahead with the allegations of Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico because, in quotes, he said, "I have fudged the text sufficiently to put in phantom exhibits." So he was falsifying evidence then, he could be doing it now. They also used the name Arlene Specter, who made this available to UPI. Arlene Specter is running for the governor of Pennsylvania at this time. He was the gentleman on the Warren Commission, the attorney who hid the amount of bullets and the possibility of silencers and did not ask to see the car that John Kennedy was in that's now sequestered in Dearborn, Michigan at Ford Motor Company. Arlene Specter created the Bullet 399 story, the fabrication of the amount of bullets that went through John Kennedy. So this recently released CIA document is false. Now, it's false for another reason. It's a planted document that the UPI picked up. I called a Mr. Cohn today, Ron Cohn at UPI. I'll give you the address and the phone number. You can write to him. I'm going to send him the minutes of the Warren Commission meetings. And I told him that the CIA did not ask to have Lee Harvey Oswald's corpse dug up. In fact, they ordered it cremated. And if the Warren Commission had the body of Oswald cremated, I believed that the body had been substituted, that this was not the same Oswald that was in the Soviet Union. And if he challenged the UPI story by Michael Levy, and challenged the committee right now, to exhume that body, it would be the story of the century. It's the #1 story of the century, like the Howard Hughes body, or the Adolf Hitler body, or the Romanoff body, and even that one of John Wilkes Booth. I think that these are important escapes, and once you get a recipe or a formula, it works. The recipe has worked. We have to expose the recipe and pass it along. This article is a lie. The CIA did not want to dig it up. And I read to you, as I did to Mr. Cohn, I'm copying for him, the minutes of the Warren Commission meeting. Some of them were published by David Lifton in a book called Document Addendum to the Warren Report. The January 21st meeting, this is before Marina Oswald was called as the first witness, before any of the witnesses were called. They were talking about some matters at the January 21st meeting, and then Chairman Earl Warren said, "We will go to the next item H under Roman numeral 2, being very businesslike, the remains of Lee Harvey Oswald, and a letter we received from Nicholas Katzenbach," that's the Attorney General. Now the situation is this. This man is buried in a cemetery, and it takes officers around the clock to watch him, and watch and see that they don't come in and exhume him and do something that would further injure the country. Now, I don't know who they is, but Earl Warren was never asked, and certainly Jerry Ford, if he was at the meeting, he's still alive. Hale Boggs is dead, and Senator Russell from Georgia is dead. But Jerry Ford's alive, and maybe he would tell us who they is. But again, very businesslike. Under Roman numeral 2, the remains of Oswald, they would injure the country. So it's been suggested that we should save expenses. How they're going to save, the Warren Commission is going to save money. We should exhume him and then cremate him. Now, the mother made some public statements. I'm reading from the Warren Commission meetings that the stenographer took down. Said she didn't care how much it costs or what it is. She just won't consent to his cremation. But his wife, of course, that's a different story. Since she's come to this country, is studying the Catholic religion, and she hasn't accepted it, but she goes to 2 Catholic churches, and we know that they're opposed on religious grounds to cremation. But I think if we gave consent to anyone creating this man, we would be in trouble. So, and then I would, and then Earl Warren stops talking, and Senator George Russell said, do we have jurisdiction in that? It would seem to me it would be in the court down there in Texas, because the Warren Commission was working in Washington. I don't see that we would have any right to pass that on. And Earl Warren, again selected for his political career by Murray Chotiner, who selected Richard Nixon, the same Earl Warren that ordered the concentration camps for the Japanese during World War II, said, well, the question might arise before this thing as to something on that body now. I don't know what it is. It might be in the course of the bullet, or it might be something else. But I don't think we would want that disposed of until our report had been made. Now, isn't that interesting that they're going to write a report about how Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald? There's been a discrepancy in the autopsy report, so-called autopsy report of that man that died, called Lee Harvey Oswald, in the direction of the bullets, and it could easily be that he didn't die from the single bullet that Jack Ruby shot, but had to be helped along either in the ambulance or from behind, the way Thane Caesar did in front of all those people at the Ambassador Hotel. But Earl Warren has been told something. He says there's something on that body. Otherwise, why would the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court sit down January 21st, 1964, before they even ask the bullet direction, how many bullets did Lee Harvey Oswald get killed by 2 gunmen? They're going into this investigation, but there's something on his body that Earl Warren has been told, obviously, because he's not sure, but he knows one thing. He says, we don't want the country to stand another shock. See, we can't injure the country anymore, he says. And then Russell says, Hale Boggs agrees, absolutely not. We wouldn't want to do something until our report's been made. We wouldn't want to dispose of that until our report is made. And Boggs says, absolutely not. And Senator Russell says, because then they would make a case of it. I thought we might do this. I thought we might get a mausoleum to take this body, and we'd seal it up and put it in the mausoleum, and it would be unknown to anybody else. Now, along with the minutes of the Warren Commission meetings are the fact that every secretary either was pregnant, CIA woman on leave, or CIA, and every stenographer and every person who guarded the minutes of these meetings worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. So I'm reading you the minutes of the meeting to show you that in July 1978, the CIA said they wanted him exhumed. And meanwhile, every staff of the Warren Commission was in the CIA, and this was the minutes of the meeting, page 163 of David Lifton's book. Senator Russell says they would make a case of it. So why don't we do this? Get a mausoleum to take the body, and we'll seal it up, and we'll put it there, unknown to anybody else, if they can do that, and no one would know where it is. Now, the wife would consent to that. They don't use the name Marina. They say the wife would consent to that, I think, and the mother hasn't anything to say about it anyway if the wife consents. I would have that rather than dig up or cremate it right now. We might get into a great religious controversy. Well, they have to dig it up to get it in the mausoleum. And Boggs says, well, I'm a little concerned about moving him. You remember how funny it is, how history repeats itself? All that controversy about the body, ultimately, of Lincoln. And Earl Warren says, Lincoln? He says, not only that, of John Wilkes Booth. The people swore at the last that it wasn't Booth that they killed down there in Virginia. You know, the Navy put a body way down there in the Navy Yard, And then you have people claiming that they're John Wilkes Booth all over the United States. And McCloy says, when I was in the War Department, they opened up these records, and it's a very dramatic thing, the most dramatic thing you ever saw, you ever read. And it told how they took a lantern in some fort down there and dumped him in the water, I think it was. And then Senator Russell says they put a round of shots in him. That just happened a few years ago, that came out. And John J. McCloy says it just saw the light a few years ago. And John J. McCloy, head of the World Bank, the reconstruction of Germany, Chairman Chase Manhattan Bank, on the Warren Commission, the man who released the bulk of the prisoners from the Nuremberg trials and sent these Nazis all over the world. And of course, as George Seldy said, there were 2 million on index cards that they kept a secret that we don't know where they're located. John J. McCloy, again, is continuing his cover-up after Nuremberg, and it's 1964, January 21st, Warren Commission meetings, and he says, I don't think we ought to have it on the record that we're moving in this thing. We're not saying anything about it. The stenographer took it down. The minutes were found in the archives. He says, we're not going to say anything about it. And Senator Russell says, if the wife isn't willing to have it moved, it's a question of watching to prevent any body snatcher from moving him. And then Hale Boggs says, well, I would like to move something about this. He said, the point I'm making, I'm listening to what you said, Mr. Chief Justice Earl Warren, but if you move that body, I don't care if you move that body 20 feet over to somewhere else, somebody's going to say it's not the body, and you're going to have have somebody go down there and pull it out of the mausoleum and have x-rays made and prove it is the body of Lee Harvey Oswald. It may cost a little money to have a cop or two around, but in this case, it's worth it. He says in this, around there, but it's worth it. And Earl Warren says, well, I would prefer that. And Senator Russell said, should we leave it there until we complete our work, which is going to be in September 1964. And J. Lee Rankin, the head attorney, says it's in Fort Worth now. And Senator Cooper says it's not within our competence. And then Hale Boggs gets smart. He said, well, it's in our competence. We can call the U.S. Department of Justice through Nicholas Katzenbach, and we can tell him to tell somebody there, the Dallas authorities, to get this thing going. And Earl Warren says that's the best way to do it. That's what I was thinking. If it had to be a choice between cremation, which they would do later, or moving it, I wouldn't take cremation by any stretch of the imagination yet. They're going to wait till the report is done and put that body that's supposed to be Oswald's in a mausoleum. And Boggs says, well, I think cremation's out of the question. And Earl Warren says, but I think the suggestion that is made is most sensible, and we should try to insist on it. That is the Warren Commission meetings. They were declassified February 21st, 1968, the cancellation on them. They've never been published anywhere, and I'm going to be using them in a book that I will write hopefully someday, Lee Harvey Oswald and his doubles, and how I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was flown out of Texas and into Baton Rouge and down to Brazil, probably to that Nazi colony of Daniel Ludwig's down there, disguised as a missionary of the Latter-day Saints. The information of the routing has come from various sources. One party who has relatives who met Lee Harvey Oswald in Helsinki before he went to Russia, he arrived on an army plane. The Latter-day Saints are the Mormons, and I got the information from a former Mormon who is trying to expose the conspiratorial assassination links to Mullen Associates, the Mormon Church. And Mullen Associates, a public relations firm, did represent the Free Cuba Committee, and Mr. Riley, who was receiving money from the Mullen Associates account, the public relations firm in Washington, D.C., hired Lee Harvey Oswald at the Riley Coffee Company in New Orleans. The story that Oswald was flown also remains open. I was told by a woman whose relative was in the FBI about the helicopter that was left for Lee Harvey Oswald to escape out of town, that they did have FBI had a plane that was useful for that purpose, And then I was told about the route, the plane trip to Baton Rouge by another source. Now, I don't have documents on that. This part is not documented. The minutes on the Warren Commission are documented, but the escape route isn't. Now, Joe Cooper, the journalist that was writing for National Tatler, was doing a big story on the Baton Rouge connections to the assassination of John Kennedy and the Navy intelligence connections when he was blown to smithereens and killed, and National Tatler went out of publication after that time. This information is very secret, and it is by word of mouth. Again, it has to be documented in some way, but when you have pieces of information coming from many, many different sources and people who don't know each other, I think you have to pass them on to outside people as not just theory, but what I'm hearing from, as I say, different sources who have not had access to documents, but who know people similar to what I said on the other side about this man saying in Buenos Aires about the common talk about Adolf Hitler being alive. The Senate Select Committee is going into public hearings August the 14th, and we'll have 2 weeks or 3 weeks of hearings. I planned a vacation in August for 2 weeks, and my family always believes I'm working too hard and I'm too involved in conspiracies, and I wrote to my mother a letter last week, and I said, just to prove to you that I'm not that involved, I have committed myself to a vacation for several weeks to go camping and get away from everything around here in newspapers and books. And so other people will be taping the congressional hearings for me, and if they're on the air, and of course my newspapers will be coming, and I will buy the congressional records. They'll be printed by the government printing office, but come hell or high water, I would love to see James Angleton and Marina Oswald and these various people on the TV screen, but I'll probably be giving myself a vacation from an ulcer by not having to watch them. People say, how do you stay so healthy and happy? I think it would save 2 weeks of vomiting not to have to look at the committee and their faces. I feel like I know those slimy bastards already. So I'm going to take 2 weeks. And that's another thing I do want to talk about on these tapes. If you get a series of tapes and the tapes stop coming, that's because I don't send them ahead very often unless you've taken them for a year and a half regularly. I continue to send them and know a check will be in the mail. I don't send bills. I don't have time for billing. I'm getting 40, 50 letters every 2 or 3 days. I don't have a chance to bill, and I don't want to send bills. If the tapes stop coming, keep your own records, and if you have any questions, I'll send you a copy of the running record I do of the finances. But there will be a 2-week vacation in August, so don't think that you're not paid up, and don't think that the mails are wrong. I'm giving you warning in advance now because later you may forget it, or I'll remind you later. This is the first time in 8 years that I've taken a break. Even when I took vacations before, I taped the shows because I didn't want to announce that I was away for reasons at the house, but being as 3 or 4 people are going to be staying here, I don't mind saying it because the house is covered, the research is covered as much as it can be. But I'm going to be away, and I will not be sending tapes because I just think I need a break too. The money that you sent for those weeks will be adjusted and moved up to the September, and you'll see that that is taken care of. The checks that have come now are paid almost up through November for a lot of the listeners. But there are 2 weeks. I'll make a tape August the 11th, and then I come back September the 1st, and we'll make a tape for you then. But I am going to be away, and I'm going to take a total break. And when I leave, I leave, and I'll look at the tapes later and study them, and then go into the details of what they didn't or do. But as I say, it might be a good guideline to order this position paper, and I'll have copies made for you if you don't have them already, because the House Select Committee was a total fraud right from the beginning. And of course, before I leave, I'm going to send another position paper to every member of the committee and many people, the news media, if I can raise enough money to do it. It's costly to copy these things and the postage and the letters. But before they ever started the investigation, I suggested that they have a full report of every witness who had been killed since November 22nd, 1963, and what information they would have provided, because new witnesses that are called can change the story around. If Marina Oswald gets up to testify, she can lie because William Sullivan and George de Mohrenschildt are dead. If Jean de Mohrenschildt testifies, what her testimony will be taken as truth under oath because George de Mohrenschildt is dead, and she put him into Parkland Hospital where he was teaching university and perfectly normal, where he had multi-shock treatments and drug treatments, and then, in quotes, became suicidal and crazy. I suggested that they have a list before the committee members, the members of Congress, investigating the Martin Luther King murder or the John Kennedy murder, of every piece of physical evidence that was destroyed since November 22nd, 1963, so that what the witnesses say, you can compare it to some of the evidence that's been destroyed and take it with a grain of salt and see why the people weren't called to testify who destroyed the evidence. There's no accountability for the removal of the car to Michigan or the clothing of John Connally being destroyed. And before the new witnesses were called, they should have gone into the evidence that was destroyed and the witnesses murdered for a more complete picture. I also wanted Congressman Henry Gonzalez, the first man who was to head this committee, to explain why John Connally's clothing went with him to Washington, D.C., and were sent to the dry cleaners, and this good documentation was destroyed about the direction of the bullets that killed President John Kennedy and went into John Connally. I wanted a list of witnesses of for the committee on every witness that had been put in a mental hospital or a prison as a result of what they knew about the John Kennedy murder and the Martin Luther King murder. Had they done that with people like Mrs. Stevens, the witness to the Martin Luther King murder, the rooming house, she stayed there and said it wasn't James Earl Ray who left there, or Abraham Molden, or George de Mohrenschildt, and many others that were put in mental hospitals or prisons because they were witnesses. Besides those that were killed, those witnesses' cases should have been examined, just like going into why did James Hosty destroy a letter that Lee Harvey Oswald gave him. James Hosty still works for the FBI in Kansas City. And I believe he lied, and I believe that there should be new laws on the accountability of destroying physical evidence of witnesses to murders, assassinations, and there should be a law about imprisoning and giving medical treatment and drugs to witnesses to assassinations and murders. These are the keys to why the case hasn't been opened up to 15 years. The killing of witnesses, the destruction of evidence, the planting of new evidence, such as they're doing now, the CIA, yet reaffirming that Oswald did kill Kennedy twice in this article, with absolutely no physical proof that he killed John Kennedy at all. And then I thought that there should be a list of witnesses that have been blackmailed, that work for the House Select Committee and various lawyers, and find out if they are not stopping our investigation because they, in fact, have been blackmailed. My time has run out. I'm going to talk a little bit about blackmail and witnesses next week's tape, and then I want to encourage you to order these position papers so you have them, and it'll be a little directory of the hanky-pank and the foolishness of the House Select Committee that will be holding their hearings starting in August.